Hello, everyone. Welcome to MedHeads. My name's Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and today we have with us Samir Sabir, who is the founder and CEO of Brixton Biosciences. Good morning, Samir. How are you?
Morning, Fergal. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on board. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about Brixton Biosciences. What exactly is it?
Sure. Brixton Biosciences is a life sciences company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Excuse me. It's a spin out from the Mass General Brigham healthcare system here in town. And the company was founded uh, around a technology whose mission it is to essentially develop a ultra long acting nerve block that's drug free and can provide potentially 3 to 6 months of pain relief from a single injection to those patients who need it. So it's a very simple mission built around a very interesting technology that's very complicated to execute.
So, firstly, why did you choose nerve blocks as your area of expertise or your area of play, as it were? I mean, I use the word play cautiously. It's because you're not
Yeah,
playing. But,
sure.
why did you choose to go into, nerve blocks? Why not like cancer or
Yeah,
heart disease?
that's a really great question, and I've been asked that throughout my career. My two previous companies prior to Brixton were in the wound healing space, which is considered by many to be the wild west of medicine. And the answer to that's pretty simple, which is that what really interests me is areas of real unmet need that not many other people are focusing on. Now, pain is a little different. A lot of people are focusing on it now, but back then, not so much.
Mm.
We think about cancer and neurology and cardiology and all the other sort of more, for want of a better term, sexy spaces in the life sciences space. There are many companies, many labs, many venture capitalists pursuing single targets in that space, and it's crowded.
Right,
And frankly,
right.
there's a lot of focus. I like the fact that we're working in an area that serves, first of all, by and large, a underprivileged population, but also has at the same time as a huge need.
Right. Yeah, there is a huge need. 1 in 5 people in Australia, where I'm from, will have a chronic pain.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't know what the figures are in the US, but I can't imagine they would be that much different, or certainly not less prevalent. So effectively, you're developing a nerve block that's going to be administered by a pain specialist who's going to stick a needle close to a nerve that is suspected of mediating a chronic pain. And then the whole idea is that this nerve block then lasts for 6 months and you reduce the pain sensations. Or is that right? Have I got that right?
I would say that's a good representation. I would think about it in uh, actually a more familiar context, which is that when you get a local anesthetic for whatever reason, whether you're at the dentist or getting a shot for knee pain or whatever, the doctor injects lidocaine or bupivacaine or whatever it is he may be
Mm,
using around the nerve, and it blocks the nerve for a few hours, maybe a day, maybe two.
yeah, yeah.
Our goal is to do exactly the same thing, but rather than getting a few hours or a day of relief to get several months of relief. The philosophy is really that simple. From the uh, mechanistic standpoint, it works differently. There's no drug in it. It has a physical mechanism of action, in terms of desensitizing the nerve, as opposed to blocking channels that transmit the pain signal.
Mm,
Uh, but the philosophy and the patient experience should be very similar, which was very important to us early on to make sure this was as familiar as possible to both the clinicians who use this and also to the patients. And we actually envisioned this, at least in its early stages, being used primarily by the orthopedic community as opposed to the pain community, because by the time patients get to the pain docs, they've already been through the ringer, as it were, and tried a lot of other things
yeah,
and
yeah.
end up there because they don't have many options left. We hope that this will be something that will be used a little bit earlier in the patient journey. And therefore, chronic pain is kind of cumulative in the way that it works, right? And if we can intervene earlier, hopefully we can give the patients a better outcome.
Let's drill down on the mechanism of action of this your product neural ice. So just to, I mean, you've alluded to the mechanism of action of a local anesthetic, which is uh, effectively a partial temporary paralysis of neurotransmission in that nerve as a result of blocking sodium
Sodium
channels.
channels. Yep,
Your mechanism of action is different.
it is.
Tell us what your mechanism of action is in
Yeah.
neural ice.
So I'm going to take two steps back. It may take a minute to arrive at the punchline here. But first of all, our formulation, neural ice, as you would expect from the name, is injected frozen. It's shipped at room temperature, stored at room temperature. But prior to using it, you throw it in the freezer and then you take it out and inject it. And so you're injecting essentially a highly technical, highly engineered form of ice around the nerve, but it is a form of ice. And we all know already that ice has many beneficial properties, right? If you put ice on a sprain or a bruise or whatever, it does bring the pain
Right.
down, but it doesn't have particularly long-lasting effect. Once you remove it, the pain comes back. But we
Yeah.
kind of think of this in many ways as put ice in it, not on it, as it were.
Right.
Now, ice has a very interesting effect on fat cells. You got to keep with me here for a minute. Uh, it induces cryolipolysis in fat cells in quite a selective way. So it causes fat cells to basically undergo a form of programmed cell death. And nerves are surrounded by what's known as a myelin sheath. A myelin sheath is essentially a lipid-rich tissue which contains fat cells that are very similar to the fat cells that you find, around your love handles or wherever it is that you may find fat. And when you inject the ice around the nerve, it induces cryolipolysis in these fat cells in the myelin sheath, which creates sort of an injury in the nerve. It creates this sort of trigger for a process known as Wallerian degeneration. And Wallerian degeneration is a very well characterized desensitization of a nerve. It basically causes the nerve to shut down distal to where you inject the material around the nerve, but it ultimately regenerates. So it's sort of a reversible degeneration, if you like. So once you inject the neural ice, it induces this trigger for Wallerian degeneration by causing cryolipolysis of the cells in the myelin sheath that then shuts the nerve down for a fairly reliable period of time. We found to be 3 to 6 months. And then over time, the nerve regenerates and the signal comes back. So it's slightly long-winded explanation, but it's a purely physical, thermally mediated mechanism of action, and there's no active ingredients in the formulation. There's no drug in there whatsoever, which is why it will be regulated as a device, at least here in the US, and not as a drug.
Right. So let's just break this down a little bit, what you've said. So firstly, we need to explain what the sheath is made of. And you mentioned the word myelin. So really that's the insulation on the big peripheral nerves
Yes.
that facilitate conduction, nerve conduction. And so think of it like a insulation on a wire. And the
Exactly.
Wallerian degeneration that you're talking about is the degeneration of that insulation. And if just a bit like an electrical wire, if the wire is not insulated, it doesn't actually work properly. And so that's how you
Exactly.
stop
Yes.
nerve transmission. And you're saying that this Valerian degeneration is reversible after 3 to 6 months.
Reversible in the sense that the Schwann cells in the milieu
What's a
are
Schwann
left.
cell, Samir?
A Schwann cell is a cell that helps to regenerate the nerve. How about that? Does that work?
Well, it produces the myelin, doesn't it? It produces the myelin sheath.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly right.
yeah. So the
So
Schwann cells come back,
they come
and they
back. They
they
they never
yeah,
go away, but they help the
yeah,
myelin to come back, and the nerve,
yeah.
eventually regenerates over time. Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Um,
So
it's a
you've
very mild, sort of process
right,
relative to trying to cut the nerve or burn the nerve or do something nasty to
yeah.
the nerve. It's very selective for just the nerve, which
All
is
right.
why it's interesting.
Well, let's get on to that. That's a very useful segue into a discussion on why your product is better than the other kids who are already on the block.
Sure.
Putting my pain hat on. So we're
Yes.
talking about There's two things I want to explore. First of all, not all pain is mediated by myelinated nerve.
Absolutely.
And secondly, what's different about this compared to standard neurolysis techniques? It's like
Yeah.
radiofrequency ablation. I'm particularly
So,
thinking of RF.
yeah,
What
yeah.
so let's answer let's do the second point first. Can you explain to us what RF is, radiofrequency ablation? What's that?
So at its simplest, RF is a probe that's attached to a generator. You take the probe, you try and put it very close to the nerve that you want
Yeah,
to target. Then you crank up the generator and create a zone of thermal energy, and basically try and burn the nerve. Yeah,
yeah.
that's RF at its most empirical. Uh, it's an interesting question. I can tell as to why we are better than RF. I could talk about that all day long. Whereas
Well,
with RF,
give us a potted history summary.
I'll try not to talk about it all day. But look, with RF, first of all, RF involves a bunch of clunky equipment, right? You have a generator, you have
Yeah,
probes, you have all kinds of leads and bits and pieces. Our
yeah,
product is a sterile pre-filled syringe that you ship to the user and they inject it much like you inject the local. So first of all, from a
yeah.
cost, ease of use, all those things, from the standpoint of practice dynamics, it's a lot simpler. But from the perspective of efficacy, if you look at the real world RF outcomes data, particularly in the knee, the reliability is quite poor. It's in the 20, 30, 40% range, depending on which paper you believe. And there's a very simple reason for that, which is that with a probe that's tiny, you're trying to target a nerve that's even tinier. The chance of being accurate and hitting the nerve is actually pretty low. You have to be A, really good at what you're doing, and B, kind of lucky to hit the nerve.
Right.
Let's
So
try
there's
to
it's operator dependent, the efficacy to a certain
operator
extent.
dependent, biolog, but it's dependent on physiology, the patient's individual
Right.
physiology. We're not all created the same. How good are you at
Yeah.
using imaging to position a needle? I mean, there's a bunch of things with
Right.
neurolysis.
But
It's an infiltrate. It's like an injection, so it's
the
hard to
the
miss.
counter argument the counter argument is that equally your product would be operator dependent because you've still got to get your product to the nerve.
You do, that's right. But think about it this way. You have what we think about as a zone of treatment, right? So a zone of
Right,
treatment
right.
is the area uh, that your product is efficacious. So for a RF probe, that zone of treatment is maybe a millimeter or two, right? It's
Right.
tiny. With our approach, you get in the vicinity and then you flood the area, much like you do with a local anesthetic, right? I mean, you don't have to be
Yeah,
that
yeah,
accurate with a local.
yeah,
So it's just more likely to hit. It's simple as that. Now, there's a second piece to
right.
that, though, which is that a
Yeah,
probe gets really freaking hot.
yeah,
And so if you're in the wrong place, you could burn muscle, you could burn tissue, you
yeah,
could burn skin. Um, and That's not great.
yeah, yeah.
If
So
you
you've
met,
got a better side effect profile. You got a bigger zone of treatment and a reduced risk of side effects.
we think it'll be a better side effect profile. We haven't tested it head to head with RF, but there's that's the expectation. I mean, better ease of use, better side effect profile, and just less clunky and more
Right,
efficient as a
right.
process.
So
But
technically less complex.
from a user standpoint, absolutely,
Yeah,
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 yeah. I mean,
yeah.
again, we've been religious from the start about trying to make this as much like injecting a local as possible.
Right, right, right. Okay, let's go to the second issue that pain is not just mediated by nerves which have the benefit of an insulation layer, because it's only large nerves that have an insulation layer. There are multiple types of small nerves that also mediate pain. So, does your product, Neural Ice, affect those smaller nerves? And or B, if it doesn't, then where do you see your product fitting into the kind of the overall pain management space?
Yeah, that's another great question. So, um, first off, I would say if we zoom out for a second, there's not one panacea. There's not going to be one panacea for all types of pain, right?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
pain in itself is a very heterogeneous disease, and our roadmap, in many ways, in terms of where this could potentially be used, is the roadmap that was created by the folks who were interested in RF. from
Yeah.
the academics who looked at the afferent nerves that could be targeted.
Yeah.
And so it is large nerves, but smaller nerves are also myelinated. So the genicular nerves around the knee, which is the target of our first indication, they are smaller, but they are myelinated
Right.
nerves.
Yeah.
Um, and generally, these nerves will sort of start out myelinated when they're larger, and as they get into the smaller branches, they become unmyelinated. And as long as you target them at a spot where they are myelinated, then they degenerate distally,
Yeah.
and you see the same benefit. But to your point, there are going to be some indications that we're not going to touch for the very reason that it wouldn't be effective not
Yeah.
to go after a myelinated nerve. And by the same token, we don't necessarily want to target motor nerves because we don't want to shut down
Yeah.
motor function for several months as well. So, it's
Yeah.
technology that has very broad applications, but like every technology has its limitations from that perspective.
Yeah. So really, you're positioning yourself as a direct competitor to RF, which targets large nerves, large pain-bearing nerves that are not motor.
No.
No.
So we are not
Do tell.
positioning ourselves. Yeah, we are not positioning ourselves as an alternative to RF. We certainly will be. We believe a very viable and advantageous alternative to RF. But what we're really interested in is actually uh, positioning this as something that can be used early on in the patient journey when it comes to osteoarthritis of the knee, of the hip, other joints. And where we're really sort of butting up against there is basically steroid and HA injections, so visco supplements.
Right, right. So can you explain what steroid and HA injections are?
Sure. Can we walk through the patient journey for the knee very quickly? Is that okay?
Let's do that then. Yeah, let's do
So
that.
let's say your knee hurts, you go to the doctor, they give you some PT, they tell you to take ibuprofen, that goes on for a while. Eventually, osteoarthritis is a degenerative disease. You get to the point where you need to do something. The
Yeah.
first thing that you typically do is a steroid shot for these patients into the
And where do
intra-articular
you put the
space.
steroid? So yeah, you put the steroid in the actual knee joint.
Correct. So it goes into the intra-articular space.
Yeah,
And for most patients, first shot tends to work okay. You get some benefit from it. I mean, I'm grossly generalizing here. But
yeah,
for most patients, the first shot works okay. Second shot is often less effective, and by the time you have the second shot, the steroid itself is starting to do damage to the cartilage in the knee, right?
yeah,
And therein
yeah,
lies the big limitation of steroid. Um, After the second shot, you really want to think carefully before doing more.
yeah,
So where does the patient go then? Uh, they can potentially get what's known as a visco supplement, which is an hyaluronic acid based product that is injected again into the intra-articular space in the knee. And the idea of that is to provide a cushioning in the knee and
So it's
prevent the
basically
sort of
cartilage, isn't it? You're injecting something
yeah,
that's
I mean
like cartilage.
it's more like lubrication
Lubrication. All right.
to prevent the bones rubbing against each other. The problem is
Yeah,
it hasn't shown to be particularly effective when you look at the literature and the data and so on and so forth,
yeah,
but it's something to do. Now, think about this. This is the really important part of this. Between those couple of first injections and a total knee replacement, which is potentially for some patients 10, 20, 30 years, there's not really that much more you can do, right? You can do
yeah. Well,
RF.
you could do RF of the geniculate nerve. You could do a
Yeah,
geniculate block with RF. That's what I'm thinking
sure.
of,
Yeah, but that
which would be an
typically, yeah.
injection outside the knee joint per se,
Correct.
targeting
Yeah,
the nerve that supplies
yeah.
sensation to the knee joint.
So most people end up at the pain doctor, at least here in the US, most people end up at the
Yeah,
pain doctor here in the US, like sort of right at the end of their journey before they have a
yeah,
knee replacement because it's
yeah,
an involved process, it's expensive, and so on and so forth. But there's this huge sort of gulf uh, between sort of these early injection based interventions and a total knee replacement. And that is where we think this product will actually uh, be most beneficial to patients because steroid causes damage. HA doesn't work that well. Patients don't necessarily want to have knee replacements too soon,
yeah.
but they also don't want to live with and manage the pain. And so that's where we
Right.
think this can help.
So where would you inject neural ice?
Yeah,
Inside the knee or outside the knee?
no, it's injected the same nerve targets that genicular ablation by RF
Right.
targets are the same
All
targets we're
right.
going after.
So it would be an injection to the same nerve as
Correct.
RF would target.
Correct.
Would it have
Yeah.
to be done by a pain specialist?
No. No. In
No.
fact, we anticipate that, at least here in the US, our initial target group of clinicians are orthopedic surgeons, sports medicine
Right.
doctors, both operative
Yeah.
and non-operative.
Right. Yeah.
Not so much the pain docs. We did our
Right.
first clinical study in Australia with a pain doctor, by the way, and it was great.
Yeah.
Pain docs, find it very easy to grasp this because they're quite technical, and
Yeah.
they like gadgets and gizmos.
Yeah.
But again, that's not where we're initially
But
going to focus.
with this product, there's no gadget or gizmo. It's literally just an
Yeah,
injectable
I was
block of
being
ice.
that was a
Yeah.
facetious way of saying they like to try new things.
Yeah. But it's an important point to make that you to do an RF ablation, as you've already said, requires an enormous amount of technical
Yes, yes, it
kit, for want
does.
of a better word. And so you're
It's
saying that
skill
your product completely does away with that need. Now,
mostly.
can it
Yeah.
be can it be done as an outpatient in an outpatient office, or does it have to be done in an
No,
operating theater?
absolutely. No, 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 no. This is something that we ultimately envision being, if we can figure it out, primarily an office-based procedure.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that's why you're going to expand effectively, you're expanding the group of people that would be eligible to provide effectively a very effective intervention for chronic pain, especially in the
Yes.
knee. It doesn't need a theater, it doesn't need sterile
Right.
environments. It doesn't have to be a pain specialist. You've expanded the range of clinicians that can access this for a
Yes.
greater number of
Absolutely.
patients. Right, right,
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, and we'll go from the knee to the hip, from the hip to the
yeah,
thumb. Those are our first three indications. We kind of
yeah.
see how, we see a progression here. And as we do that, we also continue to expand the pool of potential users.
My next line of inquiry is what's in it? I mean, you call it neural ice. It can't just be water. What's in it?
No, no, no. I mean, look, this is a project that started at a Harvard lab in 2012, and in 2019 we spun it out into a company. So I don't want to undermine 7 years of real academic work to figure out how to do this and to make it work by just calling it ice. Uh, but uh, it's essentially a formulation that is composed entirely of excipients meaning inactive ingredients.
Yeah,
There's some saline in there, some glycerol in there. There is a tiny bit of hyaluronic acid in it. There is
yeah,
something called a polaxamer, which is like a polysaccharide, a sugar, and a couple of other components, all of which are inert. And the whole point of these components is essentially to create a formulation that, when frozen, flows through a tiny little needle. I mean, I know that sounds trivial, but trying to put ice through a tiny needle is no small feat,
yes,
and delivers the right amount of ice around the nerve. And when I say right amount, I mean the right amount, the right consistency, the right the right mass, such that when it melts, it extracts energy from the surrounding tissue, and that's what induces the cryolipolysis.
yeah, yeah,
So it is liquid in a syringe, but it's quite we call it engineered ice or high tech ice.
right,
it's
right.
it's not the same as sticking some vodka in a freezer and pulling it out and injecting it, or something simple like that.
Well said, well said.
Yeah.
So where to from here? You know, you've brought this product
Yeah.
into kind of reality, but is it available to market at the moment?
Not yet. So we're still in the process of doing clinical studies in the US. We started the company in 2019. We spent a couple of years taking what was a research project, turning it into a first version of the product. Then we did some uh, early pilot safety clinical work in Australia, as I mentioned, which was a terrific experience. We then went to FDA and asked them for an IDE, or an investigational device exemption, to test the device in the US. And we're currently in the midst of a large randomized controlled clinical study comparing neural ice to steroid. It's a 260 patient study. We're about halfway through at this point.
Right.
And we're very excited to see how the data looks. And if the data is favorable, that would then take us to the point where we submit a marketing authorization to FDA, And the hope is that it would be available for use in early 2027. Um,
Right.
so we still have a bit of a ways to go to get on the market, but well on our way. And we're also, as we work through the knee indication, also working on our second indication, which is lateral hip pain, another big problem related to the musculoskeletal system. And we're
Yeah.
starting our third clinical program later this year in, as I mentioned, the thumb joint CMC pain,
Right.
which is right here,
Right.
which is very significant from a prevalence standpoint as well.
Sure. Sure.
So, you know,
So
we're getting there.
you're getting there. You're getting there. So, from a patient perspective, what final message of hope would you give somebody watching this video and experiencing chronic knee pain?
Yeah, chronic knee pain or chronic pain of any form. I think everyone experiences pain differently, but everyone experiences pain to the detriment of their quality of life. And whether it's not being able to get up and walk to the shops in the morning or ride your bike and go to work, pain is, a real global health burden with not that many good options, and also some real challenges in terms of the opioid crisis
Mm.
technologies or products that have not necessarily had uh, patients as their uh, core focus. Neural ice, we believe, there's no such thing as a panacea, but we believe it will really have a meaningful impact on patients with certain types of pain. And we believe that it will really help them to improve their quality of life. We don't care about pain scores on a chart. We care about patients being able to get up and about and do things again.
Mm.
So that's really sort of where our focus has been to enable patients to be able to resume daily function. I mean, it's as simple as that. If you
Yeah,
can't,
that'll do. Resume
yeah,
daily function. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Samir, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time, and I do wish you all the best in your
So
endeavors to
thank you for
bring
having me.
a potentially groundbreaking new therapy that is going to open the door for pain management to a greater number of doctors and a greater number of patients.
We hope so. Thank you very much for
Yeah,
having me. I appreciate it.
it's a pleasure. Samir Sabir of Brixton Biosciences, thank you.